Welcome to Module 4, Listening and Critical Thinking. In this module, we will discuss the 3 reasons why listening is important, describe how the process of listening differs from hearing, analyze how noise perception and your characteristics can influence the listening process, apply critical thinking, nonverbal, and verbal strategies to become a better listener, apply strategies for effective listening to specific situations, including the workplace and the classroom, and to apply ethical listening behaviors. Now, remember, you can use the read aloud to have the textbook read to you if you don't want to physically read the textbook. And this is going to be a quick lecture about this particular chapter and module. Obviously, listening is important. We know that there are studies that have found that people who spend the greatest amount of their time listening is an average of 44%, followed by speaking 25%, reading 13%, and writing 11%. What about you? Do you think you listen 44% of the time? Maybe more or maybe less? Do you speak more? What do you do? Take a look at this chart. And it's the chart that says the proportion of time spent by college students in communication activities. So take a look and think about how you do you perceive things this way as well. Now, defining listening. We know that listening is the behavior of trying to understand what is being either spoken to us or read aloud to us. It is being able to actively make yourself listen to others to understand. Hearing is the simple act of receiving sound. So there's a big difference between hearing and listening. Now, active listening, which is what we want to practice, is listening carefully by using all available senses, paraphrasing what we hear, both mentally and verbally, checking our understanding to ensure accuracy, and providing feedback. So we have active listening also involves empathetic listening. This is where we listen with empathy and we listen critically, which means that we are listening with critical thinking in mind. And we can also listen for enjoyment, right? I'm sure we all do. Music is certainly made for that. So, the process of listening. So, we have maybe someone speaking to us and we form our attention. Then it goes to short term memory. And then, if we've listened to understand, let's say you're listening to understand this lecture, it goes from short term to long term memory. So we have selective attention. This is where we decide what we want to listen to and what we want to tune out. We have our working memory, and this is part of our short term memory that interprets and assigns meaning to what we hear. Short term memory is temporary. So if we haven't, let's say we haven't listened to understand, or let's say we haven't studied something in terms of maybe listening to a lecture and taking it from short term to long term memory, then often we forget what we heard. Long term memory is where our permanent storage takes place. Unlike short term memory, long term memory has no known limitations. Therefore, when we listen and we place it in our long term memory, most times we can recall what we heard in the future. Now, there are barriers to listening. So we have physical distractions. Those are the things outside, like maybe loud noises or arguing or anything that distracts us from listening. We have mental distractions, such as we think about things when we should be listening. So, for example, you may be in a classroom or you may be listening to this lecture and you might be saying, "Well, I'm hungry." And all of a sudden, you've been distracted from listening to the lecture. Can you think of a time that that's happened to you? When we multitask, sometimes we don't listen. Have you ever spoken to a parent or your spouse or your child and they were doing something and you say, "Well, you're not paying attention." That's because they're doing too many things at once. Then you have factual distractions, and this focuses on missing the main point. And then we have semantic distractions, which is over responding to an emotion laden, let's say, uh, um, word. So if someone says something that triggers our emotions, our listening may be distracted because the emotion kicked in. And then we have the perception of others, right? So as we're listening, we may not be paying attention, maybe because the person's younger than us or older than us, or what we perceive as boring, or maybe we stereotype them and we say, "Oh, we don't really want to listen to them because of what we perceive about them." And then we let signs and sights and sounds distract us. And then you have your own self. The textbook describes egocentrism, which is our own ego that distracts us from listening, defensiveness. And this is where we're listening, but we're listening because we're defensive. Maybe a person who's critical of us, we're also always on the defensive, so we listen defensively. Then we have experimental superiority, personal biases, and pseudo listening. This is where we pretend to listen. So as you read those things, you'll understand what the definitions are. Do any of these things resonate with you? Defensive listening, personal bias, or pseudo listening? So there are ways that we can become a better listener. So we realize that listening is different, according to your textbook, between men and women. So if you understand that women listen to understand and men listen in order to take action and solve problems, and this is what your textbook says. I'm not sure if I buy into this. Do you? Do you think women listen to understand and men listen to take action and solve problems? I think sometimes the opposite may be true. Listening preferences. And so we have complex information that we have to evaluate, and women like complex information that requires careful evaluation. And then men like short term, concise, unambiguous and error free communication. When it comes to listening awareness, women are highly perceptive to how well the other person understands. Do you agree with that statement? Men often fail to recognize when others do not understand. Do you agree with that? Nonverbal listening behaviors, women tend to be attentive to, have sustained contact with the other person. Men tend to be less attentive and use glances to monitor reaction instead of having that constant eye contact. Then we have interruptive behaviors. Women, in terms of women, interruptive behavior is less often, with interruptions usually signaling agreement and support, whereas men have more interruptive behavior, with interruptions often used to switch topics. Now, you certainly don't have to agree with that. You could disagree with those things. I have some disagreement myself with it, but that's what your textbook says. Then we have critical thinking that impacts your listening, and we have what's called source credibility. And in terms of critical thinking, this is where we consider the source, right? Um, and obviously, a more trustworthy source is going to be listened to more actively than a source that is not as trustworthy. So, effective listening is definitely important, especially in the workplace. So, we know that as we shift to more information based culture and information based society, active listening is one of those skills that employers say that they value highly for the labor market between now and 2031. So, it's important that you learn how to be an active listener in the workplace. In the classroom, you've got to be an active listener in terms of your lectures to be able to take in the information and be able to use it in future, not just for tests, but as you get into other more classes, upper level classes, you need to recall what you learned, right? Now, finally, there are ways that we can be a more ethical listener. And to be an ethical listener means that we recognize the sources of our own conversational habits. So we know that our family, our school, things affect the way that we perceive things, and it could affect the way that we decide how to listen to things. So you want to monitor your communication to recognize when you're engaging in poor listening skills. And then you want to apply general ethical principles to how you respond and how you adapt to others. So, in this chapter, we talked about listening and how important it is as a skill. Active listening is extremely important. We know that hearing is different than listening. We know that there are barriers like noise, physical distractions can distract us from listening properly. We know that the way we perceive things can distract us from listening actively. And then there are barriers, our own defensiveness, our own sense of superiority, or our own biases can affect the way that we listen. And we should try to be critical thinkers as we listen, take stock of nonverbal responses, understand that employers are looking for active listeners. It is a skill that is valued highly in the workforce as we move now solidly into becoming an informational workplace. Ethical listening then means that you should recognize and monitor your own communication style, apply general ethical principles to your responses, and adapt your communication style to ethical listening. And that is the summation of the lecture for Module 4, Listening. Take good care, and I'll see you in the next module.